In the summer of 2006, the town of Marlowe, Pennsylvania, was a kind of place people described with a smile and a sigh. The streets were quiet, the neighbors friendly, and no one ever locked their doors. Life moved slow there, the kind of slow that made people feel safe. It was a town where nothing ever seemed to go wrong, and much of that peace was credited to one man, Sergeant Daniel Whitaker. To the people of Marlowe, Whitaker was everything you wanted in a public servant. Decorated, dependable, charismatic. A former Army MP turned local police officer, he was a face you'd see at town parades, the first responder at school drills, and the guy who bought ice cream for kids at the fair. People trusted him, worshipped him, even parents felt safe knowing he patrolled the streets at night. Teenagers straightened up when they saw him coming. He knew everyone's name, and everyone knew his. That year, he was even named Community Guardian by the mayor's office. It was just a small plaque, handed over at a church potluck, but people clapped like he'd won the Medal of Honor. He smiled humbly, said he was just doing his job. And maybe, just maybe, some part of him believed that. But behind the smile, behind the badge, there was something much darker. On July 9th, 2006, Allison Griggs disappeared. She was 23, worked night shifts at Millie's Diner on the edge of town. A friendly girl, always wore her brown curls in a loose bun and had a laugh that lingered even after she left the room. That night, she left work just after 11:30 p.m. She never made it home. Her cell phone was found in the grass about a block from her house. Her door was left slightly open, her purse still inside. Sergeant Whitaker led the search. Of course he did. Organized volunteers. Knocked on doors. Sat with her mother. Held her hand. Told her they'd bring her daughter back. But they didn't. No one saw a thing. No CCTV. No struggle. No noise. It was as if Allison had simply vanished into the night. The case rocked Marlowe, but they clung to Daniel like a lifeline. He told them justice would come, that they'd find answers. 3 weeks later, another disappearance. Jerome Pike, 19. He'd been drinking at the local bar, a kid with a reputation for being wild but harmless. Last seen walking home, alone. This time, the search was quicker. Dogs, drones, even a tip hotline. And again, Whitaker was front and center. Organizing, comforting, taking every press call himself. No leads, no suspects. By the third case, a woman named Stacy Field, a 32-year-old single mother, things shifted. Her body was found in the woods. Unlike the others, she hadn't vanished, but the autopsy showed no clear cause of death. No physical trauma, just strange abrasions on her wrists and signs of restraint. Her toxicology report was inconclusive. People began to whisper. Not out loud, not yet, but they felt it. Something was wrong in Marlowe, something that didn't make sense. And still, Whitaker stood strong. He held candlelight vigils, gave speeches. He hugged Stacy's daughter at the funeral. To the public, he was a rock. But there was one person who noticed something was off. Officer Kendra Miles had joined the Marlowe PD just a year before. She was young, idealistic, and observant, and she couldn't shake what she saw that night when they found Stacy. Everyone else on the scene looked sick, shaken. Even seasoned officers looked pale. But Daniel, he was calm, too calm. He walked the perimeter slowly, hands behind his back, as if he were inspecting something he already knew was there. When their eyes met, Kendra remembered something she couldn't quite explain, a moment of stillness, a flicker of something in his gaze. Not shock, not sorrow, something colder. She didn't accuse him, not directly, but she did file an anonymous report, a short note left on the chief's desk. Why is Sergeant Whitaker always first on scene? The note was ignored, until the FBI got involved. What no one in Marlowe knew was that these disappearances weren't isolated. There were similar cases being tracked across several counties, different jurisdictions, different towns, same patterns, same eerie silences. And the Bureau had a growing suspicion. This was an organized offender, possibly someone in law enforcement, someone who knew how to cover their tracks, someone who knew the system and how to manipulate it. That brought them to Marlowe. Quietly, discreetly, they started watching Daniel. He didn't slip, Not right away. His routines were airtight. But then, something strange. He canceled a patrol one night, claiming car trouble. But traffic cameras showed his vehicle driving 2 counties over, past a long-abandoned mining quarry, a place with no reason to visit. A week later, cadaver dogs were brought in. They found remains. 3 sets. DNA confirmed one was Jerome Pike. The others were too decomposed to identify immediately. But the message was clear. This wasn't a series of disappearances. This was murder. The investigation deepened. They traced old coal logs, pulled surveillance data, and began looking into Daniel's former patrol routes. Most came up clean, until they found an old squad car, decommissioned and sitting in a lot. Inside, a discarded hard drive, one Daniel had used nearly a year before. Hidden within the metadata were GPS logs, private stops, repeated day tours. One location stood out, an isolated cabin deep in the woods, on land his family had owned for decades. Long thought abandoned. Agents obtained a warrant and entered the property. What they found changed everything. The cabin was empty, save for the basement. Down there, behind a reinforced door, they found photographs. Dozens. Victim profiles. Notes. Maps. But worse than that were the tapes. Stacked on a shelf, each labeled with dates and names. VHS footage. Recordings of victims, not just the ones known, but others. Victims the police had never even listed as missing. There were also newspaper clippings, carefully preserved. All articles featuring Daniel himself, being interviewed, leading searches, shaking hands with grieving families. And in the freezer, sealed in plastic, a badge from a missing sheriff in Tennessee. A case once believed to be an ambush, now reclassified. By November 2006, the evidence was overwhelming. But they needed a moment, a setting that would shake the town from its delusion and remove Daniel from power without tipping him off. They chose the Veterans Day Parade. Daniel was front and center, dressed in uniform, waving to children. He held the flag, smiled for cameras, until 2 federal agents stepped forward and cuffed him. The town fell silent. People screamed. Some wept. He didn't resist. He turned to the officers and said, simply, "You finally caught up." And then he smiled. Not the smile he wore for cameras. The real one. The kind you never forget. The people of Marlowe didn't sleep for weeks. They questioned everything. Their safety. Their memories. The faith they'd put in him. Some refused to believe it. Others swore they always had a feeling. But no one could deny what had happened. The man who had worn their badge was a predator in uniform, a killer hiding in plain sight. And now, the full story was about to unfold. The town's hero wasn't who they thought he was, and Daniel Whitaker's secrets were just beginning to surface. When the arrest of Sergeant Daniel Whitaker made national news, most of the country reacted with the usual mix of shock and curiosity. But for the people of Marlowe, Pennsylvania, it was something different. It was betrayal. Intimate and personal, like finding a wolf had been sleeping in your living room for years. As reporters flooded the streets and TV trucks lined the sidewalks, residents struggled to accept what had happened. How could Daniel, their Daniel, be capable of such horror? He had taken their trust, their fears, their gratitude, and weaponized it. But the truth was bigger than Marlowe. The FBI's evidence wasn't just damning, it was comprehensive. Hours of footage, pages of notes, names, details, and the tapes. There were 14 in total, each one worse than the last. They weren't snuff films, not in the traditional sense. But they were close. Daniel had recorded his victims in varying stages of captivity, some of them pleading, others silent. Each tape began with a date, a name, a calm voice behind the camera. The voice was unmistakably his. He never appeared on camera, but the way he spoke left no doubt. Casual, clinical, as if he were conducting interviews, not documenting crimes. The tapes didn't show the actual killings. He'd edited those out or never filmed them. But the evidence was more than enough. Forensic teams matched backgrounds, voices, victims, timestamps. They began to assemble a timeline stretching back nearly 7 years. Daniel Whitaker wasn't just a serial killer. He was a methodical predator. one who had used his badge not only to gain access, but to erase suspicion. His position had given him the perfect camouflage. And people were starting to realize there may be more. One tape, marked only with a year, 2002, showed a teenage girl in a red hoodie. She was tied to a chair, sobbing quietly. Her face was gaunt, her clothes tattered. Her name had never come up in the local missing persons database. A cross-reference with national reports led to a match. Heather Quinn, 16, reported missing from a foster home in Ohio. At the time, Daniel was stationed at a nearby military base during his final months in the Army. He had started earlier than anyone thought. That revelation changed everything. The FBI now classified Daniel as an interstate serial offender. Over the following months, they exhumed old case files, reopened cold cases, and coordinated with police departments across 3 states. The list of potential victims grew to 19. 19 confirmed, with possibly more. In Marlowe, Officer Kendra Miles had become something of a reluctant symbol. She had been the only one to question him. Now, people looked to her for answers. But Kendra wasn't celebrating. She spent most days locked in the evidence room, combing through files, trying to understand what she missed, what they all missed. She remembered the barbecues, the charity events, the coffee runs. She remembered the way Daniel used to laugh. The trial was set for March 2007. Federal court, with multiple charges: murder, kidnapping, obstruction of justice, abuse of authority, and more. The prosecution's case was ironclad. Video, forensics, eyewitnesses, surveillance, chain of custody was perfect. There would be no technicalities, no loopholes. Daniel's defense team didn't even argue innocence. Instead, they leaned into a fractured mental state, childhood trauma, PTSD from the military, dissociative disorders. But it rang hollow. To the jury, Daniel wasn't a broken man. He was a conscious, calculating predator. His demeanor in court didn't help. He rarely showed emotion. Sometimes he smiled faintly, like he was watching a movie he'd seen before. Other times, he simply stared. Not at the jury, not at the families, but past them, as if none of it touched him. The victims' families testified, each voice a wound reopening. Allison Griggs' mother trembled as she recalled the day Daniel held her hand and promised to find her daughter. "He looked me in the eyes," she said. "He told me he wouldn't rest. But he already knew. He already knew she was dead." Jerome Pike's brother brought a photo. Just one. The last one they took together, smiling outside a gas station. He placed it on the witness stand and left it there, silent. The trial lasted 4 weeks. The verdict came back in 2 hours. Guilty, on all counts. The sentencing was swift. Life without parole. No chance for release. Not in Pennsylvania. Not anywhere. As the judge delivered the sentence, Daniel blinked slowly, then leaned into the MIC. "I still have stories you haven't heard," he said. "This isn't over." That was when the real terror set in, because beneath the courtroom, in a sealed evidence locker, there were 3 tapes labeled only with initials. No victims identified. No matching cases. And in the margins of his notebook, investigators found a list, handwritten, half-finished, with names that didn't correspond to any known files. One of them had a question mark beside it. Officer Kendra Miles. After the trial, the FBI kept Daniel under constant watch. No press access. No interviews. His cell was isolated. The Bureau wasn't just protecting the public. They were protecting information. Daniel had hinted at more. Unsolved murders. Unnamed victims. And worse, accomplices. At first, no one believed it. But then came the call. A local reporter, digging through archives for a documentary, uncovered body cam footage from a call Daniel had responded to in 2005. The footage was routine, a trespassing case. But in the background, at the far edge of the frame, was a man, standing behind the police tape. Not a civilian, not a bystander. Another officer, one who hadn't been assigned to that call, who hadn't been logged. The image was grainy, the badge number unreadable. But when investigators ran facial recognition, it matched a former state trooper from West Virginia who had vanished in 2007, just months after Daniel's arrest. His name was Thomas Gerber. and he'd been one of Daniel's close friends in the army. That changed the case once more. Was Daniel part of something larger? A network? A ring? Or just one monster with another monster for company? Authorities began a new search. Not for justice. They already had that. This time, they were searching for the truth. Marlowe never recovered. Not fully. The town shrank. Stores closed. People moved. The police department was restructured from top to bottom. Officers were retrained, monitored, replaced. Officer Kendra Miles resigned in 2008. She moved out west, started over. But the scars never left her. She kept a photo of Daniel in her desk drawer, not out of fear, out of resolve. A reminder to never assume again, because she knew something the rest of the world was still coming to understand. Sometimes evil doesn't wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a uniform, smiles, waves at parades. Sometimes it earns your trust before it takes your life. Even monsters leave echoes. After the conviction of Sergeant Daniel Whitaker, the story might have ended for most people. The headlines faded, reporters moved on, and life in Marlowe began to stitch itself back together, awkwardly, uneasily. But the people closest to the case knew something was still unfinished. Unanswered questions, unidentified victims, and that final warning from Whitaker himself, delivered with the confidence of a man who still had power. I still have stories you haven't heard. The tapes had given the FBI 14 names. The Journal had suggested more. But in the months following the trial, investigators uncovered a chilling realization. 3 of the names mentioned in Whitaker's coded list belonged to people who were still alive. One of them had been missing for over a decade. The other 2 had never been reported missing at all. This opened a new theory. Daniel Whitaker wasn't just a killer. He was also a manipulator, a man who may have orchestrated disappearances, only to later release, relocate, or silence his victims without killing them. But why? That was a question no one could answer, until one of them came forward. In September 2007, an anonymous tip led authorities to a woman living under a different name in rural Kentucky. Her fingerprint confirmed her identity. Shannon Brooks, reported missing in 1999 from Delaware. She had vanished from a rest stop while on a cross-country trip. Her disappearance had once made the news, then slowly faded. When the FBI reached her, Shannon was terrified. At first, she refused to speak. It took weeks, careful interviews, psychological support, layers of trust. Then, she began to talk. What she said changed everything. She hadn't escaped Whitaker. She had been released. He kept me for 3 months. I thought I was going to die every single day, she told agents. And then one morning, he just let me go, gave me a bus ticket, cash, told me if I ever said anything, he'd come back for me. He knew where my mother lived. My brother. He told me about their routines, their houses, things I never told anyone. Daniel had let her live, not out of mercy, but control, a psychological trophy. Shannon said he mentioned others, survivors, people like her, victims who might still be out there, buried not in the ground, but in new identities, new lives, all of them afraid. She confirmed something else. Whitaker didn't work alone, at least not always. She remembered a man who visited the basement twice, clean-cut, spoke softly, gave her water. He said his name was Tom, she said. They argued once. Daniel didn't like how long he stayed. The FBI reopened its dormant file on Thomas Gerber, the vanished ex-state trooper who had once been stationed near Whitaker. The agency now considered him potential accomplice, or even a recruiter. But Gerber hadn't been seen in nearly a year. The investigation into Gerber led authorities to an abandoned warehouse in Virginia, where he'd once rented a storage unit. Inside, agents discovered maps, marked with pins, dates, and photographs, notes in shorthand, surveillance footage, and a wall lined with driver's licenses. 12 of them, all belonging to people who were still officially missing. The case broke wide open again. Marlowe became ground zero for a federal task force, but the town had little left to give. Its people were tired. The police department had been gutted and rebuilt. Its former officers, once respected, now lived in the shadow of doubt. For every person who called them heroes, 2 more asked, where were you while this was happening? Even Kendra Miles, long retired from the force, couldn't escape it. She had moved to Colorado under a new name, working as a private investigator. But when the news broke about the survivors and Gerber, she returned, not to help the investigation. Not at first. She needed closure. She requested a meeting with Whitaker. It was denied at first, then approved under strict conditions. The visit would be recorded, monitored, no physical contact, maximum security protocols. When Kendra sat down across from him, Daniel looked older. His hair had thinned. His eyes were sunken, but he still smiled. "Officer Miles," he said, "or is it Ms. Dawson now?" He had done his homework. "What do you want?" "Daniel," she asked. "You already know," he said. "I want to be remembered." The conversation lasted 17 minutes. During that time, Daniel made references to more victims, more tapes, another location, the one with the dog. He was baiting her, trying to manipulate, but Kendra saw through it. "You're not a riddle," she told him. "You're not a mystery. You're just a coward who hid behind a badge." He laughed, quietly, then leaned forward. "You ever think maybe I wasn't hiding?" She left without responding. But the visit had one consequence. Daniel had confirmed something unintentionally, the existence of a second storage unit. Federal agents moved quickly. This one was in New Jersey, under an alias. Inside, they found what would be known as the final tapes, 6-minute DV cassettes, each labeled with initials and symbols. One stood out, a tape marked MH. The initials matched Mark Haywood, a local journalist from Marlowe who disappeared in 2004 while investigating corruption in the police department. His death had been ruled accidental, car crash, body burned beyond recognition. But when they compared dental records, they found the truth. The body wasn't his. Daniel had used a fire to cover a switch, planting someone else in the car, while Haywood was held somewhere else. The tape confirmed it. Haywood was alive for days after the crash. Then, nothing. No known burial. No location. Just silence. By early 2008, Daniel's health began to fail. He was diagnosed with lymphoma. Treatment was limited. The Bureau debated whether to push for more interviews, more confessions. But his condition made it a race against time. A final interview was scheduled. This time, the interviewer wasn't an agent. It was Shannon Brooks. She had insisted. With trauma counselors nearby and security measures in place, she sat across from the man who had once terrorized her. She asked one question, "Why me?" Daniel paused, then said, "Because you look like someone I knew. That's all. A coincidence." That answer broke something in her, not because of what it said, but what it revealed. There was no master plan, no guiding motive, just random, meaningless evil, cloaked in routine. It could have been anyone, and that made it worse. Daniel died in his cell 5 months later. No final confession, no secret letter, just silence. The official record lists 24 confirmed victims for potential survivors, and one named accomplice, Thomas Gerber, still missing. But there's an unofficial list, too. Victims not of violence, but of trust. The children who grew up believing cops were protectors. The neighbors who invited a monster into their homes. The officers who doubted themselves forever. The families who never got answers. Marlowe became a lesson, a place studied in law enforcement seminars, a case analyzed by behavioral psychologists, a name spoken with caution. And then, 1 year later, a letter surfaced. It was postmarked from Mexico with no return address. Inside was a single photo. It showed a man in sunglasses sitting at a beachside cafe. He looked remarkably like Thomas Gerber. On the back, handwritten in clean block letters, "You caught one of us.